Now, I think a lot of data talks are about what I call hard data. So that's data that's either easily measurable or leads to some sort of growth, productivity, or capital gains. This talk is actually going to be about another sort of data. It's what I call soft data, which I define as data that is personal and playful and revealing of the human spirit. In fact, every data set that I show today has just an N of 1. It's either me or my husband. I'll start with like kind of an interactive question. You can raise your hand with online if you have an answer that you'd like to share. I am curious if anyone here has made a chart or collected data of something random or useless purely for the sake of amusement. Yeah?
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Does anyone want to share what they collected data on? You can unmute yourself and just speak, I guess.
I, from early age of my daughters, created visualization with their Halloween candies that they collected.
Oh, that is so cute.
I was also gonna go the Halloween route, funny enough. It was me and a small group of friends. We went to Halloween Horror Nights and I wanted to see like what was the scariest ride on their opinion. So I had them rate it 1 to 10. So we kind of just, looked at that data afterwards.
Oh, exciting. Anyone else? All right. Thanks for sharing, Kat and Hein. I really love your answers because it shows that you collected data for joy, not just productivity. And whenever you do something for joy, I think it says something about you, what you notice, what you care about, what you're curious for, which is my argument that the most important data set that you'll ever have is yourself. Unfortunately, this is what my personal data set looks like. This is my checking account before and after buying a home just 2 months ago this year. I was saving and investing diligently my whole entire life, and then came the market recession, but that's okay because it recovered earlier this year. And then once I realized that it was time to buy a home, I started consolidating cash from all of my other accounts. And then on one single day, it was actually probably in a 20-minute span, I closed on the house with my husband and was left with 33 cents plus my retirement funds. Oof, okay, that was really stressful. Maybe to distract myself from being house poor, I will play some Mario Kart. This is a graph of about 700 rounds that I've played with my husband. Each dot represents one game, and the height of the dot represents the place either I or my husband got that round. The line represents a 20-round moving average over all of the rounds. Now, if you haven't seen the most depressing part of the graph yet, I will highlight it to you. Just as I was starting to get as good as my husband, I started getting worse again, and my husband started beating me pretty much every single time. At this point, you're probably wondering, why the heck did Yale give this woman a PhD? And fair question. I ask myself that same question sometimes. But in my defense, at least 33 people have downloaded my thesis in entirety, including the entire zip file that includes 200 pages of code. I think one of them was probably my former employer. One of them was definitely me. One of them was my thesis advisor. And I think 30 of them were actually my husband when we first started dating, because we started dating in early COVID and we were always wearing masks and he could never see my face. So my hypothesis is that he had to evaluate me based off intellectual attraction. All jokes aside, being immersed in these large data sets and modeling them with algorithms really gave me a unique lens for which I see everything in my world. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about my relationship with data before I move into the meat of this talk. During my PhD, I spent years debating my advisor. I'm talking about 5 years of back and forth debating on what a good model is, what is a good way to estimate parameters. And I ran countless simulations to try to prove my point to my advisor. Granted, most of the time my advisor was still right and I was the wrong one, but this did make me an expert in numerical optimization and something called model complexity trade-off. For the non-stats nerds out there, it basically means I wrote algorithms to do the laziest possible math we could get away with to find useful information. After my PhD, I optimized another data set. That data set was revenue. I joined a business development team for a drug modeling services startup. The way I like to describe this is I transitioned from optimizing mathematical systems of molecular interactions to business systems of human personalities. And, I made the company a lot of money. I climbed the corporate ladder until I was a director. And by the time I left, I was pulling in about 30% of my company's revenue. Before you judge me for being too capitalistically motivated, I'm going to throw my advisor under the bus here. I don't think he's in the room. He did tell me to go be an investment banker after I finished my PhD because academia did not pay well. Anyways, I was doing well at my job, but I felt progressively less fulfilled. And I didn't really understand why. I couldn't pinpoint it. I just knew I had to leave to figure it out. So I quit at my peak. I quit cold turkey. I knew I wanted to do work that felt true and not just lucrative. I wanted work to be an expression of who I was as a person. And so I started fulfilling some pipe dreams. I became a high intensity Pilates instructor. I started becoming a somewhat competitive ultramarathon runner. But through it all, I still couldn't turn off the part of my brain that saw everything as data parameters and models. I saw algorithms and how I cued Pilates. I saw systems and how people designed their running plans. And I loved data, especially soft data. I love the unobvious signals in our daily life, in our internal world. So the rest of this talk is going to be 5 flash vignettes, 2 to 4 minutes each. That's how I like to go through talks kind of pretty rapidly. They're centered on the themes of play, career, and humanism. Exhibit A, play. Chapter 1, I suck at Mario Kart, so I turned it into a data experiment. While it's still fresh in our heads, let's get back to that example that I just showed. Now, I've always sucked at video games. I didn't play video games growing up. And so as an adult, I lack spatial coordination and also just like the strategy part of the brain that is necessary for playing most video games. My husband, on the other hand, he is a beast at video games. He grew up playing them. He's been a video game nerd his whole life. And so when he got injured and we started running less together, our new hobby was playing Mario Kart together. And he always got first place and I always got last place. And I thought I wasn't getting better because I just kept getting last place over and over again. And I got sick of losing. Honestly, I was a sore loser. And one day I sat and I thought to myself, how can I turn this story into redemption rather than defeat? And then I had a light bulb moment. Hey, I'm a scientist. I love running experiments. What if I collected data every round and controlled for certain variables? And maybe if I can track my progress, I'll feel a little bit less demoralized. So I did. I started a Mario Kart experiment. Now, any good experiment has the thing you measure, and everything else should be controlled or randomized. The thing that we wanted to measure was skill, which we used race placing as a proxy. Things we controlled, characters, I always played Wiggler. Keegan always played Lakitu. Carts, we both always used the Biddy Buggy. And difficulty, we always played on 150cc. We randomized the tracks. I had a random number generator between 1 and 48, and then we always played against the bots, the 10 CPU bots, which are supposedly naturally chaotic. And now I'm actually going to share the live dashboard. This is the full graph of what I showed you in the beginning of the talk. You can see my husband's 20-round moving average, along with all of the individual race data points. I have a table here of just all of the rounds that we played, which is 1,033 so far. And then this is, I think it's called a bar scan plot. I actually don't know. It shows the density of the times that Keegan beat me over the times that I beat him. And it's pretty satisfying, I think, this bar scan plot, because you can show that over time, the playing field got more equal. But if you look at this chart, you can definitely see that my progress is not linear. It looks like I got worse at certain points until I finally stagnated. And something interesting that I'll point out is that it appears as if when I got better, Keegan got worse. I don't think that's actually true. My hypothesis is that the bots kind of calibrate to your skill level. And so as I got better, the bots also got better. And so Keegan just had tougher competition. All right, so digital games are pretty fun. I think analog races are even more fun. Chapter 2, gravity, endurance, and a whole lot of hills, a 100K in race data. So as I alluded to before, I am an avid trail runner and I prefer very long distances. I spend a lot of my miles on the trail with my husband, Keegan. We've done many races side by side, and in fact, he even proposed to me on the trail. Keegan and I were gearing up for our biggest race yet, which was the Canyons 100K race. Now, something interesting about me is that I actually never collect run data, as big as a data nerd I am. And the reason why I never collect run data is because it kind of makes me progress obsessed and neurotic. And I only like to collect data if it gives me joy or a sense of introspection. So for that reason, I always run watch free. I never know my mileage or pace. But as I was gearing up for my race, a lot of my friends that weren't in the ultra running community kept asking me what the experience was like running such a long distance. And then I had a light bulb moment. I could turn my run data into an infographic, and then I could help people understand what it's like to run an ultra marathon and also validate my own sense of pain. The next slides I'm going to show you are the first infographic that I've ever made, so be gentle with your judgments. So the UTMB Canyons 100K. This is the adventure at scale. We ran 64 miles, which translates to the distance between San Francisco to Palo Alto and back. It's also 90% around the circumference of Lake Tahoe. And what surprises a lot of people is how much climbing there is. We went up about 13,000 feet, which is equivalent to about 30 times up Cocoa Head Crater, or about 45% up the height of Everest. This is a space-time chart of our journey versus the journey of the top 3 women. I was inspired by the Mary train schedule visualization, which shows trips between Paris and Lyon in 1885. On the horizontal axis, this is the time, and then on the vertical axis are the train stations. And each line kind of represents the path that a train is taking. You can clearly see, when they've stopped at the stations, and also when some trains, or how some trains move faster than other trains based off the steepness of the slope. So I tried to recreate this for our race. And it's kind of ironic how compared to that train station graph, our lines look so smooth, which I thought was very unintuitive because our paces were definitely not smooth. As I mentioned in the previous slide, there was about 13,000 feet of climbing and descent, so our paces were all over the place. I really wanted my pain to be more validated, so I wanted to add a third dimension for elevation gain. So I did. I love this graph because it shows forward, upward, and onwards all at the same time. The greenest colors represents an elevation loss of up to 1,200 feet per mile. The reddest section represents an elevation gain of up to 1,200 feet per mile. I want to point out this one specific section over here, which is aptly named the Devil's Thumb out and back, where we climbed the height and descended the height of the Chrysler building in 1 mile each way. Something interesting about running hills is how much it affects your pace. First, let's look at the uphills. The good thing about running such a long race is that you have so many miles worth of data. Here, I've plotted the elevation gain on the horizontal axis and included little bars to give you an indication of the relative grade. And then our pace is on the vertical axis. Each dot represents 1 mile. Now, this graph, if you think about it, is pretty intuitive. The steeper the uphill, the harder it is for your muscles and your lungs to work. So the slower you go. Downhill running, not so straightforward. Downhill running is super fascinating in my opinion. There's a lot of things going on biomechanically and neuromuscularly because at first, this gravity really helps you. It takes the load off of your muscles, so you start to run faster and faster as the hill gets bigger or the downhill gets bigger. But then after a certain point, I call this the anti-faceplant threshold, you kind of need to slow down so you don't fall forward or to the side. And so your paces actually get slower. I was interested in the threshold for which gravity stopped working in our favor. And it looked like the inflection point was at about a 700-foot drop per mile, which translates to a grade of negative 13%. And interestingly, I did my literature search. This is well validated on treadmill studies. Somehow, this is a universal threshold for which everyone starts to slow down no matter how fast you start. And this threshold was the same for the top 3 women as well, even though their paces were a lot faster than mine and also tighter together. That concludes Exhibit A about play. I'm moving on to Exhibit B. You know what they say, something like work hard, play harder, something like that. So Exhibit B is about career. Chapter 3. My husband quit his 9 to 5 to be free. I ran a data experiment to see if it worked. While I kind of wrestled with my own sense of purpose in my career after leaving my job, I watched my husband rebuild his own from scratch. 4 years ago, he left his full-time military career to build his own business called WebBay. This is a web development business that has a content arm, a product arm, and a services arm. The reason why he started his own business was because he wanted flexibility, uncapped earning potential, and most importantly, fulfillment. But I was wondering if freelancing actually delivered the freedom and fulfillment he imagined, because selfishly, I wanted to know whether I should follow in his footsteps or try to take somewhat of a different path. And then in a light bulb moment, I can turn him into my research subject. So I automated a survey through AppScript called Inventory of Your Week. It delivered to his inbox at 11 a.m. every single Sunday, and it asked him to rate his work flexibility, work satisfaction, and life satisfaction on a scale of 1 to 5. I did this every single week, or he did this every single week for a full year, giving me 52 data points. This is a heat map of how he responded. What you're seeing is the columns represent each of the different questions. So work flexibility, work satisfaction, life satisfaction on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being better. And then each row represents 1 week of the year with the 52 weeks going down vertically. Now, as you look at this, you're probably thinking this doesn't look like there's any pattern. It just looks like complete noise. To which I'd say, yeah, freelancing is really chaotic and probably pretty unstable feeling compared to a full-time 9 to 5. I did ask him to write a short journaling section because with any sort of quantitative data, I think qualitative data is just as useful, especially if we're collecting data from a human. I'm not going to read through all of them. I'll highlight a few blurbs. His happiest time that year was when he was off the grid, not working. We were hiking in Nepal, and he said, Nepal is cool, love my partner, making money while hiking feels cool. He's talking about his passive income. And then another week, he felt relief leaving a big client. This was also the week that we got engaged. And then 2 weeks later, it was the worst week of his year. He had a rough personal life week, and he said, this is all I can think about. Now, behind this chaotic heat map, there's actually some sort of structure. I used what's called network analysis to map the relationship between these three variables. And if you think about it, it's a pretty unintuitive result. What I predicted was that his work flexibility would drive his work fulfillment, which would in turn drive his life fulfillment. The arrows kind of indicate the direction of causality, by the way. But what I found was the opposite. It seemed like his life fulfillment was the one driving his work fulfillment, which was driving his work flexibility, which to me suggests it wasn't an objective work flexibility. He was having some sort of perceived work flexibility that was driven by his overall sense of fulfillment. In other words, life fulfillment, not work flexibility, was the strongest predictor of his work fulfillment. That also means for Keegan, it really wasn't about work-life balance when he was freelancing. It was about work-life integration. Freedom didn't mean much in his work if his internal life felt outside of sync. Now, in the thick of my career, there was a lot going on in my personal life, the stuff that many of us go through, and many of you guys have probably gone through, and it's the stuff that makes us all human. Exhibit C, human. Chapter 4, I'm growing a little dude inside of me. Or no, this is chapter 5. No, this is still chapter 4. We have one more after this. After Keegan and I got married, we both had a goal to start a family. After my first missed period, I started taking HCG strip tests. For those of you who are unfamiliar, these are little strips that you dip into your pee, and there's a control line that shows that the test works, and then a test line that shows you the amount of HCG in your pee. HCG grows exponentially after you get pregnant, so the darker the test line, the more certain you are that you're pregnant. And here I've marked the day of my cycle, of my menstrual cycle, so you can just see, like, the second strip was taken 5 days after the first strip, then 3 days, so on and so forth. By day 31 of my cycle, you could see a faint line. And then by day 34, there was a pretty obvious line. This photo is, I think, really scientifically satisfying and a great data visualization in and of itself, but it's not a super cute way to announce a pregnancy. By this time, we were really excited and wanted to share with our friends and our family. And we're like, okay, what creative way can we announce our pregnancy? And then I had a light bulb moment. People love pregnancy announcement videos. My husband and I aren't necessarily vloggers or super creative in that department, but we did kind of have a dream of playing with stop motion. I love data visualization. So if I combine those things, we could place a data visualization spin on our pregnancy announcement. And so this is what we released into the world. You guys hear the volume?
Right now.
With the heartbeat?
Yeah.
Be normal.
All right. Into measurement 10. Waving. Hello. Oh, moving. Okay.
Okay, let's talk more about the data visualization component. You've probably all seen, like, the baby is the size of insert fruit or vegetable here. And it's actually a lot harder to get right than it seems. Because first of all, timing is messy. Your pregnancy is counted from the date of your last period, not actually from the date of conception. So if you're like me and you ovulated late in your cycle, the sizes are off. And I had to recalibrate the sizes to a new fake gestational age to account for the fact that I ovulated late and things were kind of not synced up. And secondly, the visual display of the size progression itself is not super straightforward. Visually, we think of size progression more as an area or volume rather than a length. So for example, if I showed a string bean instead of like a little potato, it wouldn't show the progression quite as well. So I put a lot of thought into picking consistently roundish objects. This is going to be my final vignette. With the pregnancy, the home purchase, and career crisis, I was going through a lot of change in my life. And these were visible external changes, but I was also going through a lot of invisible internal turmoil. Now, I've always had big emotions. I've felt my emotions deeply, and I've struggled with clinical depression and panic attacks most of my life. Even after years of therapy and medication and working on myself so hard, I still saw my big feelings as a flaw. And then I had a light bulb moment. When I felt demoralized about Mario Kart, I tracked my scores, and seeing a progress dashboard made me feel so much better. I got really good at app script automations from all the surveys that I ended up sending my husband. So if I combined those two things above, I could make a dashboard of my own emotions through automated survey data. So that's what I did. Every night to this day, between 9 and 10 p.m., I get an email to me from me. It has words of encouragement and a link to a survey that has the date automatically filled out. I rate my overall self-trust excitement, anxiety, and sadness. These scores automatically plot into a dashboard that is online. What I'm going to show next is quite a vulnerable share. I went back and forth in between deciding whether I actually wanted to show it because it's going to be my actual emotions data. This is what it looks like. I have my 4 graphs. They're basically time series graphs. As a scientist, it's really important for me to define my variables. So I define my anxiety as unpleasant high stimulation, my excitement as pleasant high stimulation, and my sadness as unpleasant low stimulation. I thought that pleasant low stimulation was kind of already wrapped up in the anxiety part, so that's why there's not a 4th one for that. Instead, I wanted to look at my self-trust. With all this subjective data, I also wanted to make sure I was defining my axes. So for self-trust, a score 5 meant I felt like I didn't need to force anything in my life, whereas a score 0 meant I felt like I was messing up my future. For anxiety, I would only put a score 5 if I had a panic attack. Now, what you'll see through these graphs is it doesn't really look like I made any progress. There are a lot of ups and downs. There's a lot of spikes and dips, and at first, that's what I focused on. I really wanted to see progress. I wanted these lines to look like my Mario Kart dashboard, where they trended in a certain direction. And for a long time, looking at this dashboard was really discouraging for me. And I realized that was because I was thinking of some emotions as good and some emotions as bad. But then it clicked. Our emotions aren't moral judgments. They're not wins or losses. They're simply information. They're neutral signals about what matters to each of us. And in the end, they're not necessarily problems to fix, but signals to hear. So what started as a self-improvement project became a self-acceptance project. The point no longer was to feel better. It was to listen better. And what I saw wasn't failure. It was my own humanity. And your humanity is a very beautiful thing. That concludes all of my vignettes. I do want to close with a question to the audience. You don't have to answer out loud, but if you could turn the lens on yourself, what invisible corner of your life deserves to be made visible? Where can you see soft data in your own life? And if you want to DM me your answers privately, or you just want to chat, my social handles are here. You can find me on LinkedIn and Instagram. And then I also write a blog called Wiggly, Playing in Nonlinear Spaces. It's on Substack. Separately, I'm still super in the thick of figuring out what my next full-time career is. So if any of you want to chat about that or have ideas or people you might want to connect me to, I am super open to that. But yeah, I guess I'll open the ground for questions and or comments.